on some subconscious level, I believe that this is the type of relationship that I'm worthy of, I will keep attracting that. But when I do the cleanup work around, like, I am so unbelievably worthy of a person that sees me no matter what the circumstance, and that we have such a beautiful, fulfilling connection that is so unbelievably aligned. And I'm really not interested in anything that doesn't feel precisely like that all of a sudden, because we have such a deep core belief in that as not only what's possible for us, but what we are worthy of. Eventually, we start to attract something very different into our lives.
Sometimes I wonder, what does it really take to be an empowered woman in this day and age?
That to me is an individuation process and becoming more of a solid self. I'm sort of being that outlier, that pioneer, and doing things a different way. But I think that that is what is required a lot of times. What does being a strong feminist mean to me? How do I define that for myself? I think there's a lot of ways that as we reclaim the aspects of our feminine essence, that I can know that I can take care of myself and support myself and still really long for love and connection and partnership. And that doesn't make me any less of a feminist. I get to define that for myself. But I think that's a little bit how we start to shift from what I call that like wounded masculine, like the world defines who I am, or there's like a blueprint for what is normal, to that healthy feminine space of like, I trust in my own wisdom and my intuition, and I get to define these things for myself.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dreamcatcher podcast, a place where your dreams can find a voice. I'm your host, Celine Chenoy. Thank you to all of you who return every week to tune in to become a better version of yourself. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already, and rate our show if you enjoyed this episode. Many of us often feel a sense of unease in our intimate relationships. If you're struggling to pinpoint the source of this discomfort, you are not alone. My guest, Dené Logan, has discovered an essential insight in her quest for relational satisfaction. The answer often resides in the natural balance of masculine and feminine energy that exists within us all. Today, she will unveil a transformative perspective on how understanding our inner masculine and feminine energies can be the key to unlocking fulfillment in our partnerships. Dené Logan is a group facilitator, therapist, author, and wisdom seeker living in Los Angeles. She has a master's degree in counseling psychology, has been featured on ATTN, and is the mentee of acclaimed psychotherapist Esther Perel. Dené co-hosts the Cheaper Than Therapy podcast alongside her soul sister, Vanessa Bennett. Dené will equip us with practical strategies on how to blend masculine and feminine energies. This will empower us to shift from the codependent and transactional perspectives of relationships to a more interdependent and balanced dynamic. Hello, Dené. How are you doing today?
I'm so good. Thanks so much for having me, Celine.
Well, thank you for making the time to be here. And I have to say, I just finished reading a book, and your insights and frameworks on the inner masculine and feminine energy is truly groundbreaking, because I am familiar with this dynamic, but the way you wrote about it was something that I have not come across before, and I found it truly eye-opening. And it seems like understanding masculine and feminine energy and how they work together seems to be the key to creating fulfilling relationships. So I want to applaud you on that before we get started.
Oh, thank you so much. I've sort of become a little bit obsessed with understanding these energetics and these dualities that I now see as existing in every aspect of our life. And it's like, I can't see life without masculine and feminine, or, the light and the shadow, the yin and the yang, all of these different ways that we speak about these dualities that exist within all of us. Now I see them everywhere, and they've kind of become the
I don't blame you.
Yeah.
They are quite fundamental to our social existence. But I'm curious to know, Dené, what makes this topic so important to you personally?
Mm. Well, it's interesting. I work primarily with couples as a marriage and family therapist, and there's so much about the way that I was seeing what we're seeking in our relationship dynamics a lot of times that is coming from the perspective that we need to get something energetically from the other person. Like I was sitting with couples for a while, and ultimately at one point I realized like everyone's competing for energy. We're sort of feeling like if I can just get this person to shift their energy and be who I believe that they need to be in this moment, then I'll have peace, then we'll have fulfillment. And what I realized was, the thing about energy is it's just really, we are energetic beings, so we are impacted by one another's energy. But, the only person that we're ever able to be in control of is ourselves. And so if we can really do this work to certainly unpack all of the messaging we've gotten culturally around, how we're socialized around gender and how that sort of causes us to disassociate from aspects of ourselves, then we can sort of reclaim this thing of what we believe that we need from another person to be whole, realize the wholeness that we already have within ourselves. And then we just meet our relationship dynamics from a completely different standpoint, right? And we sort of are in that thing of like filling our own cup up energetically so that we can pour from the overflow into our partnerships or our relationships in general, not just romantic relationships.
Were there any specific patterns that you saw in your relationships and the relationships you witnessed in your practice?
Yeah, absolutely. I start off the book talking about the fact that I was married for I was just like the most amazing human, still one of my best friends in the world. But there was so much about the way I was socialized in, what I a patriarchal culture is, and I really think the wounded part is important because a lot of times when we talk about patriarchy, I'm not talking about men or masculinity. I'm talking about structures of dominance, right? But there was so much about the way that I was socialized as a woman in a patriarchal society that really taught me to be in some adversarial ways of being in my relationship dynamic, to really be in this space of like us fighting for dominance with one another. And then what I realized when my marriage ended and I was a couples therapist and really started to sort of like look at the black box or, all of the things about my own relationship that I was coming to understand, what I realized was we're really set up in our relationship dynamics to be in that adversarial space with one another and feel like we're competing for energy and we're not safe in one another's presence, right? So it's like really sort of going back and understanding who we are in our essence and all of the distortions that make us feel like we need to defend against love and defend against, looking foolish or, being vulnerable with one another. And so many of those things are sort of the messaging that we get in a wounded masculine template of who we need to be, which is really sort of, protect yourself at all costs, being afraid of failure, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. These are all like really wounded masculine messages that we get within our current paradigm. But what I believe is happening is we're sort of reclaiming aspects of the feminine that exists within all of us. And that is the energetic of our soul. That's the energetic that trusts in life and that knows that like no part of me is ever diminished by being vulnerable. And as we start to integrate more of our feminine into, our way of being internally, then we can show up in our relationships that way as well. And so it's not that we're like doing away with masculine energy. Masculine energy in its healthy form is beautiful. But a lot of what we've been raised in is really with a lot of distorted relationships to these energetics.
For those who are not familiar with toxic and feminine energy, can you describe what each of those are like?
Yeah. So, I talk a lot about how most of us are doing a dance between our wounded masculine and our wounded feminine energetics. And as I was saying, with like the wounded masculine energy, it's a lot of what our culture, especially in Western culture, really sort of prioritizes, holds value around. It's sort of, competitive energy, that whole like John Wayne, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, isolation, that it's weak to be vulnerable or to allow people to see you, and that we have to sort of like gauge our life by how it looks from the outside versus how it actually feels on the inside. So a lot of times you'll hear people talk about things like attachment styles. And if we think about it in terms of attachment energy, the wounded masculine energy is the more avoidant energy that exists within all of us. So it's like afraid of love, afraid of failure, controls life by keeping people away, that sort of energetic, right? Now the wounded feminine energy that most of us are really conditioned to hold with a lot of contempt, even though it's energy that all of us have within us, is the energy of insecurity, sort of people pleasing, outsourcing our power, needing that external validation to feel like we are enough. The energetic of the anxious energy. A lot of times, if we think about it in terms of attachment style, that's our more wounded feminine energy. And so
Oh,
what I started
interesting.
to yeah. And so again, these energetics aren't gendered. And that's like a really important point, because if we think about the ways that we're conditioned to think about gender, a lot of times we're really conditioned to think about like holding our wounded feminine energy with a lot of contempt and being mad at ourselves and like upset when we have that wounded feminine energy within us. But it's something that all of us will embody and have those qualities. From time to time, regardless of how we identify in terms of gender. And the same can be said of our wounded masculine energy. But what I found when I was working with couples is the work is to sort of identify what energetic we're operating from in any given moment. So if I'm in my wounded masculine energy, my work is to start taking up space with the healthy feminine energy within me. So it's sort of the opposite energy in its more healthy form. And so if I'm in that avoidant energy and really like controlling and afraid of, you know, failure and not being what I believe the world around me needs to be, my work is to really trust in life, and that if I am vulnerable, I'm going to be okay. And there's like a larger force that's holding me, to allow myself to be seen, to maybe make things a little bit lighter and playful. The feminine is that like playful energetic, the sensual energetic, all of that is feminine energy. And so if I can the feminine characteristics when I'm in wounded masculine energy, it's sort of how I shift my energy, and relationally how I bring a little bit of a healthier polarity. And then similarly, if I'm in that wounded feminine energy, so I want to be my own containment, my fierce protector. I want to sort of tap into my toolkit to remind myself of who I am, bring in that energy that are like really rooted in a sense of self and mission that is larger than this moment. And that's sort of me coming back into my healthy masculine energy, which is what I shift into when I find myself in my wounded feminine, if that makes sense. I know. I just said a
Yes, it
lot.
does. How do we know that our masculine and feminine energies are not in harmony? Are there certain telltale signs that they're not in balance?
A lot of what I get into in the book is that like I give a like 4-part quadrant that like lists what each of these energetics are. And so you can sort of like, a lot of times I'll give them to clients and they'll like put them on their refrigerator, almost like a cheat sheet or like a cliff notes for like where I am energetically. And they'll be like, oh, Dené, I like noticed I was in my wounded masculine. And so I like really came into my healthy feminine with my husband, and it really shifted our energy. But beyond that, if we want just like a quicker way to tell, if I'm in that avoidant energy, which is the energy of feeling like people need too much of me, people are, overwhelming, and just like a lot of contempt energy, everybody's annoying, I just want to be alone, get away from me. That's probably my wounded masculine energy, right? But if
Okay.
I'm in that anxious energy of like really feeling like I need someone else in order for me to be okay, and I'm sort of clinging and trying to fix the energy between us, then I'm
That's a
probably in
wounded
my
feminine.
wounded
Let me guess.
feminine. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
So you can kind of tell a lot of times by how you're feeling when you're in a
Uh-huh.
place where, and we know we're in our wounded energy because it doesn't feel good to be there. Like if we're in that wounded feminine
Oh
space,
yeah.
it
It,
feels like anxiety. And then when I'm in
mhm.
that wounded masculine space, it feels like irritation and isolation, and just like I'm mad, energetically a lot of times. Right. So it can kind of be a quick way to ascertain when we're there.
And I would imagine it has its roots in our relationship with our parents, or
Mm,
the kind of relationship dynamic that was there between them.
Yeah, well, a lot of times the way I like to think of it in sort of the larger context of what we're grappling with, certainly I think the relationships we choose, especially, before we maybe do some of this work to make our more unconscious points conscious, we a lot of times are choosing relationships based on the pain points from our childhood.
Yep.
And a lot of times, like the parent that we felt like we didn't get the thing that we longed for from, will pick someone who sort of recreates that feeling within us, right? So our subconscious will tell ourselves, like, if this person can just see me in the way that mom couldn't see me, then it will mean that I'm worthy of that love that I didn't feel from mom all along. And normally it doesn't work that way because we pick someone a lot of times with a similar vibration in terms of their pain points. They're at a similar level energetically, right? So we sort of both continue to play out those wounded energetics with one another until we bring that consciousness in. But, a lot of where I've landed in terms of relationships is I really see relationships as like soul work now, and that they're like these divine assignments. So whatever is going on between me and another person, it's sort of the precise curriculum that I need at this moment in my soul's path to teach me some things about myself and where I am developmentally. If we're willing to see them as that versus like, if I can just get this person to change the way they're behaving, then I'll be okay, which is a lot of times missing the point of what's being evoked within us.
What does it really take to stop that tendency to attract a partner who we think on a subconscious level will help us deal with those wounds that we have from our past? Because I asked this question because I have a friend, she continues to do this, but at the same time, in between the relationships, I know that she's doing the work. I know that she's going for workshops. I know she's working with a therapist, and she's really, like, really rocking in all areas of her life except her relationships. What does she need to do to really get out of that toxic pattern of constantly choosing someone who's not good for her?
Yeah, it's tough, right? And what I love to say is I don't think our healing is ever the linear process that we're conditioned to believe that it is. Like we'll never be at that point of arrival. So your friend might really like grow and expand in her capacity to notice certain things relationally and maybe, have someone that she would have dated in the past who talks to her in a certain way and all of a sudden she's like, "Oof, I don't like that. Like, actually, that doesn't resonate, right?" And she might notice, like, a couple years ago, I might have kept going and ignored that, the way that felt within me, right? But I think the thing of anxiety or feeling insecure or all of these things that we think of in these wounded energetics, they're a part of our human experience. So I think we have to give ourselves a lot of grace that they will come up and that we can build that muscle of learning to bring ourselves back energetically to a place that feels a little bit more grounded in that solid sense of self. But, as you were saying with your friend, I think a lot of times relationships are such a potent curriculum because they become the activation point unlike any other. So we can be just like doing great, chilling on our own, and then we get back into a relationship and all of a sudden it's like, I'm activated again. What happened, right? Like, why is this bringing up so much within me? And the way I really like to talk about that is like, beautiful. That's just like such rich grist for the mill. Let's get in there and be in relationship with it. But the important thing, I believe, is to take a lot of personal responsibility around this is me being shown to me. So it's not so much like this person that's like, quote, toxic or the bad guy or like whoever this person is that I keep dating. He is showing me some sort of a shadow belief about myself that I need to get in right relationship with, right? So maybe that belief is that I can't have anyone unless they talk to me a certain kind of way. And that's something I need to like really challenge. Or, sometimes women of a certain age will be like, I'm at a certain age, like who's going to want me? Or I've got like 3 kids or whatever. Nobody's going to be interested in me. And that's really important for us to like do that reckoning work around like, there's a shadow belief here. And similarly to what you were saying before, a lot of times as we get into that shadow work, there's a core belief from something in childhood that brought those things to the surface. And it's like, okay, if it's like a historic belief, where did that come from? Like, whose voice is that telling me, like, you've got 3 kids, nobody's going to want to date you, or whatever the thing is? And is it true? What else could be true? Because we don't really attract what we believe are we don't attract what we want. I believe we attract what we believe to be true. So if on some subconscious level, I believe that this is the type of relationship that I'm worthy of, I will keep attracting that. But when I do the cleanup work around like, I am so unbelievably worthy of a person that sees me no matter what the circumstance, and that we have such a beautiful, fulfilling connection that is so unbelievably aligned. And I'm really not interested in anything that doesn't feel precisely like that. Then all of a sudden, because we have such a deep core belief in that as not only what's possible for us, but what we are worthy of, eventually we start to attract something very different into our lives, you know?
Wow. Why couldn't it be more simple, Dené? We
Why
are
do we have
so
to go back and do all that
complex.
shadow work? Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, that is the thing where we have to give ourselves a lot of grace, because it's, for most of us, a lifetime of this conditioning. And, you know, especially for women. And, you know, as we were talking about your friend, I think a lot of times, and I do a lot of work with retreats and facilitating groups for women. And we've had so much programming that teaches us that our worth resides in us being chosen, right? And that once someone else decides that we're worthy, then that means like we can take that deep exhale and know now that because someone else has decided, I am something, right? And is it true? And I think a lot of what we're seeing collectively that is shifting, and this is to me the rise of the feminine principle, is really women coming back into that space of empowerment and saying, you know, I'm worthy because I say so. And I'm actually not interested in anything that is not aligned with the person that I have the potential to be. It will be a distraction. And so ultimately, I'm going to focus my energy inward, focus on becoming the person I want to be. And then when it's justified, because a relationship is so unbelievably aligned with the truth of who I know I am, that's when I'm interested in a partnership.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to announce the upcoming launch of my new book titled The Nomadic Soul, a seeker's guide to finding a sense of self and belonging in the modern world, which highlights a profound yet often unexplored part of your identity that holds the key to everything from answering your biggest questions to finding deeper meaning and joy in everyday life. Visit thenomadicsoulbook.com to learn more, download a free chapter, or to buy a copy. And there's a lot of talk about toxic feminine energy as well, or girls who are trying to be too much in their masculine and how that prevents them from finding a relationship where she can be in her feminine energy. What are your thoughts on that?
You know, again, I think a lot of times I think of it as like what our conditioning has done to perpetuate wounding within us. And so when people talk about like feminine energy as like toxic, or like women
I mean,
being
it's
in
also
their
for men. Sorry, toxic masculinity. That's also a
yeah.
huge topic right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's just a lot of us unpacking what the paradigms have been that have really created these energies where we feel like we like armored up, and in so many ways it's like I think what we would think of as like women being too much in their masculine has been a survival strategy in a patriarchal culture where for centuries now we've
So
really been
true.
conditioned to believe like you can't trust in men, right? Like they're going to hurt you, they're going to cheat on you, they're going to like do all of these, maybe they'll burn you alive at the stake, like all of these various reasons
Yeah,
that we've been conditioned, you know,
right.
sometimes with really good reason to not trust in men and masculinity. But I think there's a way that, similar to what we were just saying, our perception of reality is based on what we believe to be true. And so that if we believe that men are awful and I just have to like, I have to be the man and I can't trust in men and whatever the thing is in our relationship dynamics, then that will be our experience, right? And if we say like, no, you know, I believe that there are so many beautiful, soulful men, out here for me to attract, and I will maybe make friendships with men and be in relationships with men in other ways that sort of cultivate that sense of safety for me until I find something that feels aligned, then I think we just have a different experience of what's possible for ourselves. But, you know, to the point I think you're making, I think for both men and women, there have just been survival strategies that have been passed down generationally that have really conditioned us to not be in right relationship with, I think, what all of us are seeking, which is that relational harmony.
That's really good advice for those who are feeling jaded right now in the
Mm,
dating world, because it is tough out there. And if
yeah.
you are constantly having experiences that are disillusioning,
Mm,
you will have a tendency to believe that all men will treat me in a bad way or all women are just going to take advantage of me. So I think that that's really good advice, what you just gave.
well, thank you. Yeah, I often say I do believe that words are spells because there's power in the words that we speak and the resonance that they carry within us. And so it's like, sometimes women will say to me like there are just no good men. And I'm like, "Ooh,
Right.
that is a powerful spell you are casting there, sister." Like take a breath and just like think about what that felt like within you as you just said that, right? And how that might be sort of blocking your energy to be open to seeing the good men that may be around you, right? Like it's like that red car principle. I don't know if you've heard about that, but like if someone says to
Yeah, the
you,
reticular activating system,
yeah, like notice
referring
how
to
many
that.
red cars you see, you might not see
Yes.
any until you really start paying attention. But
Start
if you're
paying
like,
attention.
universe, show me all of the good men, show me all of the beautiful men. I am so open and hungry to see them. All of a sudden, it's like you're flooded with red cars in the form of men, right?
Sure. But until we do that work of fixing our wounded masculine and feminine energy, it would
Mm,
be tougher for us to recognize them, right? Because you said on a subconscious level, we'll still be attracted to those partners who may not be
yeah.
good for us.
Yeah, and I am in such a kick lately, Celine, where I feel like I just feel like almost everybody needs like a giant timeout from the dating scene. And I'm joking when I say that, but I think we're just so conditioned to believe that we're incomplete until we're partnered that a lot of times we're making choices in terms of who we partner with that aren't aligned with our highest truth. And it's not to shame ourselves for doing it, but there's something that comes, when we come from the space of scarcity and lack, we make choices based on that belief system, right? And so if we bring the focus back on ourselves and do some of that shadow work, some of the work that we're talking about to really feel like I'm worthy of all these things that I want, be in relationships with people without, so much of an agenda. And I can really meet this person soul to soul versus, the roles that we've been conditioned to play based on our gender. And I think we just have a very different experience of the type of people we meet in the world when we're coming from that soulful place.
And you did talk about the unspoken war of the sexes that play
Mm.
out in relationships. Can you tell us a
Mhm.
bit about that battle and why it's important for us to be aware of them?
Yeah, I think it's so much of what we've been talking about that there's a way that I think we normalize things like, wives competing for like whose husband is more useless than the other, like comments like, the old ball and chain is at home and like, when someone's getting married, it's like he's gone now. It's a wrap. And like all of these things about what we're talking about in terms of like the way that we talk about our lives matter. But also, I think it's so much of what we've been talking about in terms of the ways that we've been conditioned for centuries to just feel like we need to be in these adversarial roles. And we've never really had a reckoning with aspects of who we've been to one another based on gender that there are some pretty significant pain points around, right? I talk a lot about how so much of the research that's been done around couples work and couples therapy is still from origin points within the 70s. And in the 70s, women couldn't even have their own bank accounts, which really sort of impacts the way that I am having conversations about my relational fulfillment, right? If I know that my survival depends on me staying in this relationship, I might not be as honest about what is and isn't fulfilling with my relationship with my husband, right?
Could you please say
Um,
more about that? So you're saying that the vestiges of the past, the challenges that women had to face, especially monetarily, does that still lie within us in some way?
Oh my gosh, of course. I mean, and I live in the United States where we've never had a female president, right? Like that there's been a way
Almost,
that,
almost.
well, yeah,
You were
and
close.
and still yet, right?
Yeah.
And there are just ways that we've never had a reckoning with the things that, our mothers taught us as women about, how much we could trust in men or not, what we had to do to keep ourselves safe and be pleasing objects. Because a lot of what a patriarchal culture teaches women is that your worth is in being a pleasing object. So someone will choose you, and that your shelf life sort of expires at a certain age. And once you're past that age, you're no longer as valuable as you used to be, right? But we never really think about what that does between two people in terms of their intimacy when that is the foundation that our relationships start on, right? And so if we're sort of coming together based on me being a pretty object and you choosing me and me feeling like I have to, if I'm the man, protect, provide, and procreate, and that's my role, and my role is to be the pleasing object, which, so much of that has shifted even with women more in the workforce. And so in a lot of ways, we're just really struggling to identify, like, what does it mean to relate to one another without all of these societal gender roles that have been placed upon us, but also just really like who we are becoming as we are healing more and more. I think a lot of people are investing a lot of energy in becoming a more authentic self. But then what does that look like relationally? I think we're a generation of women that were really taught you can do anything. You can become anything you want to be. But we're living amongst a generation of men that nobody taught them how to be in relationship with that successful woman and not feel somehow diminished if she makes more and is the breadwinner in our family, right? And so a lot of what I work with couples is sort of grappling with some of those dynamics that we really haven't been conditioned to speak about, but they're very alive in the relationship dynamics and how we interact with one another.
How do you help those men understand that those archaic gender roles don't exist anymore and that they need to change the way they see women?
Well, it's tough, right? Because as much as we would we would like to say that those are a thing of the past, there's still like a lot of ways that I think patriarchy is sort of like in its last hurrah, like really sort of like thrashing and attempting to be seen before it dies, right?
I wouldn't say that's the case in my culture. Like I'm from the Indian culture and even like the Arab culture, lots of Asian cultures in general. I think it's still quite embedded. So I mean, it does show up in society. But I would imagine in the Western world, it's definitely more evolved out there, and there's a growing acceptance of the new ways of being.
And I wouldn't necessarily say that. And even when I say like on its last stand, I mean in terms of like the larger cycle of our life. If we think about like the thousands of years of patriarchy, I think the rise of the feminine principle was sort of prophesized to start in the Aquarian age, which began in 2023. So we're sort of like right at the tip of that, right? But it's going to take some time, right? And so what we're seeing is, if you look at South Korea and the 4B movement, what that is about is the rise of the feminine principle and a like generation of women saying, the misogyny is too much. It's too thick. We're out. We're like buying out. We don't want to get married. We're not going to have babies. Like we're done with this. And so to me, it's sort of like us seeing how these paradigms are shifting. But in the midst of that, we're still living with like incel groups and, all of the podcasts of men talking about like, alpha males and all of these things that really feel like a pushback on the ways that we had sort of progressed.
In my mind as you speak.
Yeah. So those are the things that I mean when I say like, it's like, and its last stand, like fighting to be seen and heard. And it's not so much like men are fighting. I think it's those structures of dominance are fighting to sort of have their voice here at the end as things are really shifting. And we're all sort of grappling with like, who are we going to be to one another if we want to sort of put down these outdated gender roles and meet one another in a little bit more of our humanity, right? But no, I think sometimes it might be a little bit more below the surface in the West, but it's just as much there and prevalent. And for all of us to like, have this reckoning with that I think we are right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So a lot of shifting in the social realm, that's for sure. And sometimes I wonder, what does it really take to be an empowered woman in this day and age without the risk of being called, I don't know, an annoying feminist or woke, degrading labels like that?
Mm,
I mean, it can be
yeah.
hard, especially with the
Yeah.
patriarchy still having a strong hold
You know,
in some parts.
yeah, I think for me, so much of what I've come to understand about how we integrate these dynamics within, and really that to me is an individuation process and becoming more of a solid self, really means that we are in that place of defining ourselves for ourselves. And that will require sometimes a little bit of exile from, what the collective thinks is quote normal or, being accepted by the group and like fitting in with sometimes the maladaptive ways that everyone else is acting. And I might not fit in because I'm sort of being that outlier, that pioneer, and doing things a different way. But I think that that is what is required a lot of times to sort of say, what does being a strong feminist mean to me? How do I define that for myself? I think there's a lot of ways that as we reclaim the aspects of our feminine essence, it's like integrating, that I can know that I can take care of myself and support myself and still really long for love and connection and partnership. And that doesn't make me any less of a feminist. I get to define that for myself. And if, anyone else in the world disagrees with me, that's got to be okay, right? But I think that's a little bit how we start to shift from what I call that like wounded masculine, like the world defines who I am, or there's like a blueprint for what is normal, to that healthy feminine space of like, I trust in my own wisdom and my intuition, and I get to define these things for myself.
So for someone who feels that their feminine or their masculine energy is out of balance, what are some steps that they can start taking to create that healthy polarity within themselves and in their relationships?
Well, something I talk about a lot in the book is that I think when we've been in this space of the externalized culture, so, when we're in that wounded masculine paradigm that we were talking about, we're sort of oriented towards the external world. And there's a blueprint for life. And if you just follow this plan and go to school and get a job, and then, what ends up happening is we go through that process of what Carl Jung called the individuation process. We start to bring our focus inward, right? I've done all the things and I've followed the blueprint of society and I still feel like I'm struggling. What now? And start to do some of that inner work. And that's when we enter what I love to think of as the hollowed sacred space of our inner feminine. And so we go inward and we start to get in relationship with the self that we were before the world told us who we needed to be acceptable. And a lot of times what that looks like is, I love to say, like going back for that inner kiddo and just like getting really clear on what did that inner child within me love before, I started adapting all these ways of being, and what could I just like spend hours in my room dreaming about or playing with, or, like really getting back into that space of our essence and giving ourselves permission to be in that exploration. And then as we get back into that space of our feminine aliveness and play and just like free flowing energy, then we start to, I find, get into that space of inspiration. And then we get to move into our healthy masculine from the space of inspired action. And we start to want to do things in the world from more of our authentic self. And we get to say, like, how do I serve based on the truth of who I am versus who I've been afraid to be or defending against all these years. And I believe the more of us that come into this space of authenticity, because I think we all have our own particular brand of magic, then we're able to be of service in the world in the way that only we can.
And just to ground this knowledge, can you give us
Mm.
an example of somebody who embodies the perfect balance according to you?
Well, what I love about this thing is that it is, again, our life's work to come back into balance. It's, the feminine is alive energy. It's free flowing. It's ever shifting. It's never sort of that static space of like, we know what this is forever. And a part of us reclaiming our feminine is like, nobody's ever going to be in a perfect balance.
But if you could choose
Somebody who is perfect or embodies the
well, not
perfect balance.
perfect, but who would be someone who you feel has done the work and is a good example of someone we can aspire towards.
I mean, I'm like thinking of, I think there's so many women that I work with all the time that are in this like later phase of life where they, their kids have left the house and they're really sort of like in that space of like, what do I want my third act to be? If I've sort of moved from maiden to mother into this next phase. And, in terms of archetypes, we're a lot of times thought to think of that as like the crone phase. But what I'm finding is that is a lot of times like the witch phase, the enchantress phase of a woman's life. And so it's funny, I just came from a retreat in Baja and I was just like with so many women that were like in this enchantress phase of their lives where they're, traveling the world, going anywhere they want. Their kids have left the house and they're,
Yeah.
yes, they have husbands at home and they adore their husbands, but they're just like, I'm doing all the things I want to do for me. And in our mother's generation, that might not have been true of women in midlife, right? It was like, you're past a certain age, you're done, like whatever. And I think it's, for me now, when I travel and go places, like I feel a deep pride in myself traveling as a woman alone a lot of times because it's like that to me is the integration of my masculine and feminine. I'm chasing my aliveness, I'm chasing my Raja, but I'm also doing it from that space of a grounded containment of I got me and like I'll figure this out wherever I am. I might not speak the language, but I'll work it out, right? And I think it's exciting because we're living through a time where it's not so much that like anybody is, got it figured out, but we're figuring it out and we're working on, doing it in real time. And so to me, it's an exciting time to be alive.
Great. And life is a process of figuring it out, really. That's what it is. It's a journey.
Yeah,
Dené, thank you
absolutely.
so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking with you. I really enjoyed our conversation. It was truly, I had a lot of aha moments speaking to you and also reading your book. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with all of us today. I really appreciate it.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. Such a gift to get to sit down with you.
I want to let our listeners and viewers know that if you want to know more about Dené's new book, Sovereign Love, A Guide to Healing Relationships by Reclaiming the Masculine and Feminine Within, and if you want to learn more about her coaching programs, please visit DenéLogan.com. The link will be in the show notes.